Okay, so I think we're live. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for, I think this is our 6th episode now of Our Path Forward. Today we're joined by our Executive Director, Imran Siddiqi, our legal, Nejma, help me with your title. I know it changed recently. Legal and Policy.
Youth and Advocacy Coordinator.
Youth and Advocacy Coordinator, excuse me, that's right, Nejma Osman, and our Community Outreach Fellow, Aydin Anwar. So very happy to have you all today. Today we're going to be talking about, well, before we get into what we're talking about, I want to read just a brief description of what Our Path Forward is about. So Our Path Forward is a weekly Facebook live show by Care Washington that gives viewers a behind the scenes look at the work that we do at Care Washington and invites them to join with us in reimagining our path forward in this post-Trump, post-COVID, inshallah era. So today we're talking with our team about Ramadan traditions, and I'm actually going to hand over the discussion today to Aydin. She's going to be hosting the conversation today, but before we do that, I wanted to read some of the answers that we got from viewers from last week's episode. So last week we asked you all, let me pull up the question here. We asked folks, what are some Ramadan traditions that you and your family do to make this time of year special? And we got some really good feedback. One person on Twitter said, there's no Ramadan without fruit shot. And another person, Zoha, on Instagram said, staying up late till suhoor. And Nihal on Instagram said four things: decorations, sambusa for iftar, and family. So thank you to everyone who answered that question. Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Aydin, and y'all have a great conversation.
Thanks so much, Jessica. I'm looking forward to the discussion myself. I don't think I've ever had like a organized discussion on what people do for Ramadan, just because I feel like I've grown up, observing Ramadan, and it's just kind of like a given event that happens every year. So I'm excited to have this discussion. I'll start off and ask the question to both you and with Imran and Nejma. What is your background and how is Ramadan celebrated in your culture?
Yeah, so I'm from a place called Alabama, and over there, Ramadan is really unique. No, I'm just kidding. So initially, my parents are from India, and they came here during the 1960s. So, but we still observe a lot of the cultural aspects of Indian, South Asian culture from a year-to-year basis. So my wife grew up in India as well. She lived in India all through college also. So, I mean, you'll see a lot of these type of things come up in our traditions, whether it's like the food that we eat during iftar, for example, like samosas, pakoras and things like that. So a lot of those salty, unhealthy foods during iftar times, which pretty much negates the benefits of fasting, but it's part of the tradition. So we chalk it up to that. And like being from that background and having kids now, you want them to also appreciate the culture. I mean, part of the beauty of Islam is the variety of cultures that exist. And just in this conversation, it's amazing to see like folks from like different cultures, representing all these, different, food traditions and dress traditions and so on and so forth. So we definitely want our kids to be, cognizant of the culture that they inherited as well. Like, I mean, when it comes time for Eid and all of that type of stuff, we'll dress up in the kurta pajamas and whatnot. So try to, at least incorporate some of those, South Asian cultural aspects to the Ramadan.
Thank you. Imran, I know you have a background in you had a coffee business beforehand, and I know your son is really into food making, mashallah. I was just wondering, like, how much do you guys incorporate Indian desi food in your daily iftar? Is it more of like an occasional thing, or is it kind of a daily thing? I'm just curious what it looks like.
I mean, it's pretty much every day there'll be something like that. Like usually, we'll try to buy in bulk before Ramadan, like, I mean, because it's so busy, like during this time of the year, but, you know, we'll get like a bunch of samosas or something like that. So we have them over the course of the month, or my wife will make the pakoras on a day-to-day basis. The drink, I'm sure a lot of you have seen us at the masjid, like ruafza, like the pink drink is what it's called. Like my kids actually like that. It's like the rose flavored drink that we mix with milk and put ice in it. So that's also like a pretty refreshing thing after a day of fasting, mango lassi. So we try to switch it up, but pretty much on a day-to-day basis, we'll incorporate those tastes into our Ramadan palette.
Nice. It's always, I love talking about food during Ramadan, just because I guess although we are fasting throughout the entire day, we break our fast with it, and I feel like we look forward to it so much that, at least for me, like I love to plan what I'm going to be making that night. So I'd love to hear insights on food. Najma, how about you? How does your family or how does your culture tradition celebrate Ramadan? And also maybe give you background on where you're from or where your family's from.
Yeah, Somali. So my parents came about sorry, I'm losing my voice from fasting, but my parents immigrated here in the early 90s. And so, yeah, I'm Somali, and honestly, Ramadan, a lot of it has to do with like food and around food and cooking. And so that's like a huge part of our tradition. Like Imran was saying, and I think someone also mentioned one of the community answers, but like sambusa, we don't really make sambusa any other time of the year, but during Ramadan, and it's like, well, it's a good thing because it's not the healthiest, option, but so much fried food, it's funny. But interestingly enough, this year we're trying to attempt to be healthier and try to have healthy options. We've still been having sambusa, but it's in like smaller quantities and not as much fried options.
Can you give a quick overview on what sambusa is in case somebody's listening, they don't know? Like
I think like different cultures have like different ways of making like samosas and sambus. But the way that I make it in like, our culture, it's like this, you could either make the wrap from like scratch or like use a tortilla. And it's like these triangle pieces, and the filling really depends on, the person, but it's mostly made out of like ground beef, but I've seen it like people do fish. Sometimes people do beans. There's just like, I think the most popular one is definitely like the ground beef. And it's usually with like onions, serrano peppers to make it spicy, and then like cumin powder and just like a whole bunch of different seasoning. But yeah, it's like this fried triangle piece. It's really good. It is good. And yeah, and there's like people who don't eat meat. There's like, vegetarian options. So it's very versatile. And I think so many people enjoy it, like even like outside the culture. So yeah.
I think every culture like goes through like this thing, like going into every Ramadan, like we have this pact that we say we're going to eat less fried foods during the month, and then it ends up going by the wayside. But it's always like we have good intentions, but it always, but we justify it through the calorie deficiency that we experience throughout the day. So you just got to make up for it.
I think also what happens is because we're so hungry during the day, our eyes are more hungry than our stomachs. So we'll like prepare this massive amount of food, and then we'll take a few bites and we're like, okay, I'm done. And there's just a bunch of leftovers sitting there. So that's I feel like that could be a whole other discussion about food management, food waste, and being mindful of like how much we put into our bellies. We're actually like, I'm pretty sure we're actually encouraged to not overindulge or even make ourselves full, but we do that. I think the community is notorious for doing that during Ramadan, which is why even during Tarawih prayers, you have like the people talking about like bad breath and people burping next to you. Personally, I'm Uyghur, so Uyghur American. So my parents came around a few decades ago, 30 years ago. So I was born and raised in the States, but literally every night it would be, I don't think we've really eaten quote unquote American food per se. It was always Uyghur traditional dishes. And I mean, since being married last year, I moved away from my family. There are no Uyghur restaurants here, unfortunately, and every time I crave Uyghur food, I have to make it myself. But it's been a positive experience nonetheless, but it's just sometimes like I wish my mom was making some dishes. So it's been I feel like food wise, I feel like our whole conversation's been surrounding food right now, but overall, I think that speaks to the fact that Ramadan itself generally is a more similar, not a similar experience, but we are all experiencing very similar things, like fasting from food and water, trying to be as engaged in spiritual acts, be mindful of what we say, what we do. So it's not just a fasting of the belly and like food, it's also fasting of our actions and making sure that we purify our actions, which I find to be such a beautiful thing. And even the last 10 days is typically like considered the most blessed. So we still have some time to go until then, but I'm sure it's gonna fly by soon. So I'm gonna move on to the second question. What's something special that you guys do in your home or family to celebrate Ramadan? Is there something particular that stands out when you guys think of Ramadan and is unique to your family or unique to your tradition that you'd like to share? Imran, do you want
I guess I'll go first. I mean, coming from Arizona, where we had a lot of our families like in close proximity to each other, like in pre-COVID, obviously, like where you could get out there and socialize, like getting out there and being amongst each other and having sort of these gatherings. Like, I think that was really memorable, like in terms of just being around, 20, 30, 40 family members on a sort of, every other night or so. So we'd always see each other over the course of Ramadan, and then we would leave for Taraweeh afterward, the evening prayers. But since coming here, trying to sort of adjust to the new environment, trying to make this Ramadan special, especially for my kids. There's a lot of blessings that, even though I say this often, even though we're in a pandemic and we're sort of in this socially distanced time, I mean, we're still trying to get out there into the masjid as much as we can, but like even at home, try to make things special. So like have sort of the lights up in the kitchen, sort of make it festive for them during this time and help them, really appreciate, this time of the year. And especially during this time, like when there's a lot of information, like you live in this sort of age where, like when I was younger, you didn't have really like YouTube or whatever, like to access the Quran or whatever, but like, we try to like at least finish a juz per day, like, through YouTube, and you can actually like read through it. So you're almost like doing another Khatm Quran, like, finishing the Quran during the month of Ramadan, just by doing that, if you just sit down once a day. So really like sort of distancing from that normal day-to-day, like just being on our devices all the time and being, caught up in TV or shows and things like that, like really trying to, be intentional about being close to, our holy book and like that time, and really, passing that down to the kids as well.
Nice. Najma, what about you?
Yeah, I think for me, well, like Imran said, I think a lot of our like Ramadan traditions is based on like has a lot to do with like social events and like people gathering and just like having that like community, and unfortunately that community aspect has greatly reduced due to the pandemic, but this year, in terms of things we're trying to do, I think something that I've personally kind of started was just kind of like trying to have a checklist in terms of things that I want to do and like hold myself accountable, because it's so easy to kind of, get lost with like work and just like so many other like priorities. But yeah, that's something that I've been doing, and like with my younger siblings, trying to ask them like, what's one thing you learned today, and like what's something that you want to incorporate, and just things like that. But definitely trying to make time to reflect, I think, is really important. So that's something that we've been doing.
Yeah, and I think Imran, you mentioned, bringing up are using like technology to engage with the Quran, and Najma, you did as well. And I feel like that goes into my next question as to how has COVID affected our ability to engage in this worship and then observe Ramadan. Before we used to go to the masjid, and we would, a big part of Ramadan was looking forward to going to the mosque, seeing your friends, and then praying tarawih, and then going out, socializing. Obviously, at that time, you can eat food. So it's a very different experience now being at home. I know personally last year was the first year that we had to pray at home because of the pandemic. But I personally found myself feeling more, I felt like I got more out of Ramadan spiritually. So it was less about coming together with this huge, community of thoughts, and more about just like spending time, intimate time with your family. Like we would sit down after, breaking our fast, and until we were waiting for a Tarawih prayer, we'd actually watch a series by Sheikh Yasir Khadi on gems of the Quran. So he would go through juz by juz, or like chapter, or what's the part by part of the Quran. And we'd sit down together as a family and do that. And I don't think we had ever done that before the pandemic. It was kind of like, okay, we go to Tarawih, we come back and everybody does their own thing during the day. But that really forced us to sit down and just kind of like have alternative methods. And I honestly felt like I gained a lot out of that. So I'm wanting to hear what you guys have to say about how COVID-19 has affected your Ramadan last year, how it may be affecting it now. And then that would lead into our discussion also further later as to like how you guys are going about it every day, working from home, fasting, if it's been easier, harder. Kind of just want to open the floor to you guys and see what you have to say to that.
Go ahead.
Sorry. No, I was just gonna say, I think I didn't like your point in that, like, because of the situation we're in and because of the circumstances, being forced to focus and like, just reflect and prioritize your relationship directly with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala instead of like, I think that's one of the benefits and like kind of the blessings of, Ramadan in the COVID pandemic. And I think like there's just been so many resources too. And I remember the conversations like last year of people just kind of being worried of, not being able to go to Tarawih and not being able to see like family members and to celebrate that way. And whereas this year, I've seen like a lot of people just talking about how excited they are because they kind of already went through it once, and like they're excited to kind of, bring that back and then kind of reconnect and ground themselves spiritually. And so that's something that I was honestly like pretty excited about too, for this Ramadan. And there's just so many like really good series, like the Yaqeen Institute has like this series that just came out. I think it's Meeting Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and like there's so many different resources that have just been specifically for Ramadan, and like ways to just kind of increase your knowledge in the deen, and also just like specifically things correlated with COVID and worship, and like specific strategies and things to do when balancing like work life and worshiping and fasting. And just there's so many resources out there now because it's been well over a year and people kind of gone used to it in a way. So I think that's something that makes this year like very different from last year because we've already been through it and we know what to expect. So
yeah, I mean, if we think back to last year, COVID sort of was hitting right at the time when Ramadan was starting. So it was almost like a real shock to our system in terms of really, I think everybody had like sort of a plan. With care chapters, we definitely had a plan of like how we were going to work and, all of our plans for the month. But as individuals, we also, okay, we're going to be going to the masjid and doing all this stuff. We're going to be getting together with family. And then just the brakes got hit really abruptly on that. So like during the month of Ramadan last year, we're sort of like feeling our way around. It was like a very like sort of unsettling feeling, knowing that, for the greater good, obviously, for the greater good of society, that you're staying home, you're socially distancing, and you're trying to, ensure the public health by, not going for these types of things and these types of gatherings. But it was a foreign place for us, during the last year, and even working was really strange during those initial weeks and months during the pandemic. So like this year, I think, being away from, the massages for this period of time, you realize what you've lost. Maybe you take these things for granted, or you start, you sort of just go through the motions. When you go for Friday prayer, sometimes you're just going and like checking your watch and like, clocking in, clocking out, and you're not really like reflecting on what's happening there. But, being deprived of something during the course of the past year, obviously it puts things in perspective. Like, we need this community connection. We need this, this level of interaction with our community members, just like, seeing the smiles of brothers and sisters or whatever, like, meeting people in person. But simultaneously, like, there's a lot of hidden blessings, like I said, in being here at home during the month as well. Like, I mean, more intentional about, praying together in Jama'ah, like, for example, is something that we try to do over here with the kids. Like, if they were out there like in person school or whatever, they wouldn't have the opportunity. Or if I was at the office, then we wouldn't be able to pray like 5 times together. But just, these are the little blessings that you won't realize until like you don't have those opportunities anymore. Like, you get to spend a lot more time with your household, and like, yeah, it sort of gets, start butting heads a little bit after a little bit of time, but it's also like, you get to really appreciate one another during this time as well.
Yeah. I'd also like to point out that obviously not everybody has the privilege of being in a household with their family. Like, there are some people who live alone. I think that's when COVID-19 affects them even more, like having to be isolated in your apartment or your home for an extended period of time. And then not only that, but just on being like having to fast and not being able to break your iftar with loved ones. I think that can be a really difficult time for a lot of people. And to also keep in mind, this is something that I was reflecting on the past couple of days as Ramadan came in, but there are populations around the world that don't have this privilege of even fasting because of state oppression. I have, so being Uyghur and like having family in Chinese occupied East Turkestan right now, China is not, obviously it has prohibited practice of religion altogether, to the point where even observing Ramadan is forbidden. And I was thinking to myself, like, we're sometimes like thinking about the struggles of what we're going through here, and I'm like, oh, well, at least I'm not in a camp or a prison cell, being tortured because I want to pray in the cell, or because I happen to perform ablution or make wudu, for example. These are all like specific cases that have come out of, from former political prisoners who talk about how they want to observe religion in prison, and are deprived of that ability. So it just reminded me of that discussion, because I'm like, we are actually very, very blessed to be in the situation that we are in. To even be able to pray in your own home is like a huge blessing. Yeah, that was just something that I wanted to share, because I feel like sometimes when we're thinking about Ramadan, we're thinking about our own spiritual development, we're thinking about our family, we're thinking about feeding our family, but at the same time, there are so many communities out there that are really, really suffering, and to keep all of them in your du'as and your prayers is really, really vital during this time as well. And so I know, Mr. Imran, you mentioned, both you and Najma mentioned, this change in like being used to COVID, right? So how like we've gotten used to the point where it's become our new norm. So how has it affected working at a nonprofit like this in Ramadan? Like, being Care Washington, which is a Muslim organization, or an organization that is aimed to empower Muslim Americans. How has this affected your ability to work in a nonprofit? Has it made it easier? Has it made it harder? In what ways has it made it easier? In what ways has it made it harder? So if anyone wants to jump in and give your insight. That'd be great.
Yeah, I think, yeah, like Imran mentioned, like last year, once COVID hit, like, Ramadan in general for Muslim nonprofits, and especially CARE, is a really important time. And it is like probably the most important time of the year for the organization to raise funds and to be able to like sustain itself. And so last year, when just about all our plans were scratched, and we had to kind of do things the digital way. It was definitely, I think, something that we just kind of went along with it and just did it, but we had no idea in terms of like how it would be received, and we learned a lot along the way. And I think this year we definitely, obviously, like having it been well over a year, and just been working from home, and this being the new normal, like you said, this has now become something that we've, I think, really improved on, and is very much a very strong point. And the way that we do our digital outreach and just like our events, and it's gone to a point where it's like we're doing really well despite the circumstances, alhamdulillah. And in terms of like what's it like for me working at a like nonprofit, and specifically like a Muslim nonprofit, I think like it's really, this is the first job that I got like right after like graduating from UW, and so this is kind of, well, the first full-time job, and so this is kind of all I know, but I've been like blessed to have like really great coworkers, and just like this work environment is very understanding and very inclusive. We're really good at communicating, we're very transparent, and it's something that I personally am really grateful for. And with Ramadan, like as fasting people, like our team is very well aware of that, right? And so when you work with people who work in a Muslim nonprofit, regardless of whether or not they're Muslim, they have that understanding and they have that compassion, which I personally am really grateful for. So I think that's a really big blessing. Being a Muslim working with other Muslims is that they understand where you're coming from. And then also like non-Muslims as well, working in a Muslim nonprofit, is like everyone here believes the mission, is passionate about the work, and you're just working with like really cool, like-minded people. So yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Najma. I can attest to the fact that we have an awesome team and everyone is super understanding. And it honestly makes your work like 100 times easier and so much more enjoyable when you have a healthy team and a healthy environment to work in. So I'm also very, very grateful. I'm also relatively new to the organization, so for me to experience that has been a huge plus. Imran, what is your take on how it's been like working for CARE during a pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely been something that's challenging, like, alhamdulillah, for being part of a strong organization during this difficult time. But being part of a nonprofit organization in the Muslim space, there's lots of advantages, obviously, like during the month of Ramadan, for example, for those that need to sort of flex their schedules in a certain direction, like downward, because we're up late at night, a lot of times, like going for Taraweeh and like waking up at 4 a.m. for sahur and so on and so forth. There's an understanding within the organization that yes, there's certain time needs that Muslims may have for this type of stuff. So we try to make sure that there's those accommodations that exist for our employees as well, and like our employees who happen to not be Muslim, they're very understanding as well, and they're very cognizant about that. So it's a cool environment. Being part of a Muslim nonprofit during the month of Ramadan, it takes on its own different shape, because of the zakat factor, like the fact that a lot of folks are more charitable during Ramadan, where you get that infinite number of blessings because of donating to charity and your salah and all of your good deeds during the month of Ramadan. Like there's more of a push by organizations like us to obviously raise money during this month. So it's sort of a struggle, because you want it to be spiritually beneficial for you as a Muslim. Like you really look to it to be a month where you're really focused in on those important things, and which this, I think, pandemic, like I said, is sort of brought home. But a lot of times we've been out there having to raise funds at the masjids, and there's a lot of hustle that goes beyond that when you're out there like going across the state and like having to raise funds in all these different places. But thankfully, alhamdulillah, like it's all worked out over the course of the past few years. So we're thankful for the generosity of the community who's helped out. And you can always donate to us on our Facebook page here at carewa.org. Check that out. But yeah, great organization to work for. I mean, thankfully, we have a really nice team that we work with on a day-to-day basis. So thankful for all of that.
I know, Imran, you have lots of experience, being one of those people who stand up during Tarawih or in the middle of Tarawih to ask for funds, and the struggle of all that, and now not being in the physical masjid. How is it like to have to then garner everything towards Zoom, make people want to join a Zoom session, especially during a month like Ramadan where people are trying to focus on the spirituality? Like, how have you dealt with the struggles of that?
It's a struggle. I mean, like people are tapped out when it comes to like doing virtual meetings all day. So it's really difficult. Like we try to create programming that's going to be beneficial for people. Like, I mean, at the end of this month, we have, or at the beginning of May, we have Sheikh Aisha Prime, who's going to be joining our community. So that's going to be a pretty cool thing. We always want to like push things forward in terms of like bringing something that's going to benefit the community and bringing this type of thing. Like, I mean, even this program that we do here, we're trying to give our supporters and our community members a little bit of an insight of what it's like to, if you were to walk into the CARE office in downtown Seattle and like, peek into a conversation, these are the types of conversations that we would be having as an organization. So we want people to sort of be, have that transparency of like what we're like as an organization, what is our day-to-day efforts like. Inshallah, like it'll all come. Like we have a really strong base of supporters, throughout the state who have seen our work over the course of the years. Najma like really led the charge in terms of our MDAC, doing that as a virtual program with over 100 attendees and 60 meetings with state legislators. Like that is like amazing that we're able to pull something like that off, but it takes an organization that is doing amazing work to really pull something like that off. So I think the community will see, just like through these types of programs that we put together, it's not just like sort of this ad hoc type thing. I mean, it's really professionally done when it's done in our youth programming, like our youth advisory committee, or like, our ongoing legal work with our great legal department as well is it still goes, like regardless of whether we're socially distanced or not. People are still calling us for help and we're still helping them like with their legal cases. So it's just something to keep in mind. So we just got to be, continue to push the envelope and do a good job of communicating that forward.
Yeah, and one thing I'd like to add is that, like, despite being online and virtual, like the work has never stopped. And if anything, we're doing a lot, and maybe even a lot more than we did in the past. So this is really important for folks to know, especially when it comes to Ramadan and when you're trying to choose what organization to donate to, and just like keeping us in mind for sure, because the work is ongoing, and doing this virtually especially is just another level of like difficulty and ways we've kind of learned ways to like navigate that, right, and kind of maneuver that. But this is something that the work has not gone any down. So we're still going, the legal department is still getting cases. A lot of the work that we're doing is still very much ongoing. And then one thing I also like to add is that, like, even with, Ramadan, like we have our annual fundraiser, but we also like try to put in events that directly tied to like spirituality, right? And so hopefully coming soon, we'll be announcing soon, but we're trying to, the YAC, the Youth Advisory Committee, is going to be doing this, hosting this event, connecting with Allah, and we'll be having a speaker that'll be announced soon, inshallah. And so, that event will be specifically talking about ways to take advantage of Ramadan during COVID, what are specific things that we could do to kind of maintain worship during these times, especially when you're juggling a lot of things. And as a student, like, how can I add this to the million other things that I'm juggling as well? And so that will be announced soon, but the work we do is ongoing. So definitely, inshallah, make sure to check us out on our website and then on Facebook as well for more information about our event on May 1st, inshallah.
Inshallah. Also, Najma, when you're bringing up the youth event that's coming up, or even just in general, when we talk about these online events, I actually wonder, you know, like even before the pandemic, like online events weren't the norm, right? Like when we have an event, we'd actually have like a room, probably we'd have a space, you know, people would physically drive to a place and go there. And if anything, online has made it so much easier to tune into anything that you want and just listen from the comfort of your own home. Like yesterday, I was listening to Yaqeen Institute's their Quran Jam lectures while I was making iftar, like, you know, and it was live, and it was just like really, really nice to have to be able to do that. Whereas I feel like before that, that wasn't really a thing, or it was people would post, you know, people would post lectures and videos and you maybe watch it in your own time. But with the fact that there's so many like live things happening to like with, you know, community members everywhere, I feel like accessibility is also a huge component when we're talking about this stuff. Like people could be listening in from, you know, another part of a country or part of the world right now. Whereas if it wasn't for the pandemic, we might be having this conversation via like a physical, you know, a physical space, and we would only have local people at that point. So thank you guys for sharing that. And one more question I want to ask before closing off the discussion, and it's kind of, this can maybe elicit funny stories or something, you know, something of the past, but I was actually wondering working, I know you guys are all workers, or even being a student can be really challenging at times during Ramadan. I know people who are students right now, this is probably like their final season. I know my husband, he had 4 exams this week, so he's been juggling fasting and taking 4 exams, which is not easy. So I want to know about a time that you guys had to juggle real life demands while fasting. Is there one particular instance during, you know, maybe the past few years where it just stands out to you and you were just, you know, realizing how much of a challenge it can be, but also obviously a blessing? I want you guys to share an experience if you guys have one. That would be a really, I think, fun way to end off this conversation.
Well, I have lots of experiences being a parent of, you know, like being out there during Ramadan, you know, fundraising back when I was in Arizona. I have 3 sons. So usually, like, and my wife is also in the nonprofit world. And so usually we would have to split them up because she would be in one masjid one night and I would be in another masjid the same night. So I took 2 of them with me to a masjid that I was fundraising in. So I was, you know, it shows you sort of like the dichotomy, like the highs and lows of being sort of in this position. Like I'm out there, like, you know, who can give me, you know, 2 hands for $500 or $1,000, and like really, you know, giving that motivational speech to the crowd. And like people are raising hands. I got a good fundraising going, and then like my sons are like passing out the envelopes, and after they finish gathering the envelopes, I step off the mimbar and like come down, and then one of my sons throws up on the floor of the masjid. And so now the next second I'm there like cleaning up the throw up off of the ground of the masjid, and like, you know, taking a spray bottle while I still have like the envelopes in my hand, you know, from the donation. So it just puts things in perspective. You can never feel like you're too high or, you know, like too mighty in this work. So just it can bring you down to earth real easily. So, but thankfully, you know, we're able to get that mess cleaned up and move on from there.
That's actually pretty funny.
You know, I don't know if my story is not nearly as good as Imran's. I would say, well, these last 2 Ramadans I've been with CARE, so we've only done it via virtual means. But I mean, I think just like last year, you know, being just at home with the lockdown, just dealing with like the stress of the pandemic and not just having so many questions and not that many answers, and then also kind of doing all this like digital outreach, and we were just putting on programming like day after day after day. Yeah, I think it was like definitely something that I mean, it's hard because it wasn't like anything we were expecting. So it was like we kind of had to deal with just going with the flow. And so I think that was definitely a challenge. especially when, for me as a person, like I like to plan things, and then having all the plans like just gone, completely thrown away, just kind of, makes you realize that you can plan things, but you're not, God's the best of planners. So yeah, I think just knowing that, and then like using that lesson with the rest of 2020 and 2021, like understanding that you could plan, but don't plan too much, because you never know. So yeah.
I agree. I have one instance that I would like to share. I think it was, I don't remember what year it was, but it was definitely, I think when I was in high school, when it was Ramadan, and I think it was the midsummer time. So I don't think we were in school. But there was a protest in DC to, demand that the genocide of the Uyghur people stop. And I know like a lot of the Uyghur community was going there. It was during Ramadan, obviously, and I remember that day it was 90 degrees, and I don't know, for those who know, DC weather can be so humid and disgusting during the summertime. So we go there, and I think we end up marching for 2 to 3 miles, and we're yelling and chanting, and I lose my voice. I remember just being so like losing. I'm pretty sure I became dehydrated. I didn't end up breaking my fast. Which honestly, thinking back, I feel like I should have, but it's okay. Like I ended up being fine. But I was looking back and I was like, wow, like even during like at this time, we're still going out here demanding that like our people are just like live with basic dignity and rights, and nothing again, nothing stopped us really from organizing that protest, attending that protest. But life continues, you continue. And if anything, actually, I think about that day and I'm like, maybe Allah's actually rewarding us much more for doing this during a time of Ramadan, during the time of Ramadan, while we're fasting, while we're dehydrated. It was a scorching heat. It was like the sun was out the entire time. And I remember being proud of myself actually at the time. I was like, wow, I actually fasted all day today. And it was a long day too. So I'm pretty sure Maghrib came in at like 8:30 or 9. So we were there for, several hours in the scorching heat, yelling, the whole, demanding the Chinese government to be accountable for their actions. But that's just something that when I think of like tough Ramadan moments, I think of stuff like that, where it was just so intense, but like the reward or the outcome or the cause or the thing that you were working on made it worth it. So I want to thank you guys for sharing your experiences. Hopefully our listeners enjoyed this conversation. If you guys have, for those listening, if you guys have your own experiences that you'd like to share, please, comment down below. We'd love to, read them and also share on our socials as well. So Jessica, I see you're back.
Yeah, I'm back.
From here.
Great job, Aiden. I'm like, you're great at this. I'm going to ask you to do this again.
No, I really enjoyed it. I've never had like a formal discussion on Ramadan traditions.
It's great. And this is also making me think, I mean, you guys did touch on some more serious topics during this conversation. But, typically these conversations, we talk about really heavy issues or systemic injustices or civil rights issues. And I think it would be good and fun for us to think of some more, I don't want to say fun, but like everyday kind of topics like this that we can talk about. So it's not always, so that we're kind of breaking up the heaviness of what we talk about. But great conversation. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Jessica.
Yeah, so next week's episode is going to be, the theme is steadfastness. And we are going to be joined by Joseph Latchman. He's with ACRS, which is Asian Counseling and Referral Services. And he's going to be joining us to talk about the rise in anti-Asian hate and also the parallels between what happened to the Japanese American community and also what's happened with the Muslim American community. We're also going to be joined, I just found out, we're going to be joined by Samaya, who is one of our new board members and a lawyer, and she's going to be joining us as well for that conversation. And we're going to be thinking, I want everyone to kind of be thinking about this before next week, but what does steadfastness look like, not just during the month of Ramadan, but what does it look like now that Trump is out of office. You know, I've said this before, we've said this before, but Trump was such kind of like a catalyst and a motivator. Joseph, we had a conversation, he had a really good way of putting it that I'm forgetting now. Hopefully he'll share next week. But, you know, Trump was real blatant with his stuff. And now that he's gone, how do we remain vigilant? How do we remain motivated and take all that energy into 2021 and beyond? So excited for that conversation. Our question of the week for that episode is, what does steadfastness mean to you? We're going to post that in the comments, and we'll post on our social media. We would love to see your answers, and we'll share them during next week's episode as well. So thank you so much, Imran, Nejma, and Aiden. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.
Guys.
See ya.